They found the first baby wrapped in church linen. No birth record. No mother listed. No father ever asked for. Just a pale child, quiet and still, sleeping beneath a stained glass window in rural South Carolina, 1891. The ledger described the infant with one word written carefully in ink. European. Not white. Not American. European. That word would appear again, and again, and again. Over the next 40 years, dozens of babies would pass through small-town orphanages across South Carolina. Children with light skin, light eyes, and no family history. No origins. No questions allowed. They vanished into adoption papers, shipped north, sent overseas, sold quietly to families who were told these children were rescued from elsewhere. But they were not from elsewhere. They were born here. And the state never wanted anyone to know why. South Carolina at the turn of the century was a place that lived on silence. Small counties, dirt roads, churches taller than schools. People did not ask questions. They survived by not knowing. County orphanages were often run by churches, brick buildings with long hallways and locked record rooms. Most children who arrived were poor, sick, or unwanted. But then there were the other babies. They arrived clean, federal quiet, sometimes already baptized. No mothers accompanied them. No death certificates followed them. Just infants delivered after midnight, often by men in plain coats who did not stay long. The caretakers noticed patterns. These babies were never dark-skinned, never marked as mixed, never given local surnames. Instead, they were listed as foreign-born, even when their umbilical cords were still healing. And when staff asked questions, they were reminded of something very clear. This is not your concern. The strangest detail was not the babies. It was the absence of fathers. In a time when illegitimacy carried shame, records were usually detailed. Names scratched out, lies written in margins. Something. But in these files, the father line was left blank. Clean. Untouched. No guesses. No accusations. No attempts. Midwives whispered that some births happened inside church-owned properties. Basements. Attics. Old seminaries no longer in use. Women arrived pregnant. Women left empty-handed. They were given bus tickets. Small sums of cash. Warnings never to return. And every single child born from these places was described the same way. White passing. That phrase did not exist officially yet, but the system already understood it. Why European? Because it erased guilt. If the child was foreign, no one had to ask who the parents were. If the child was imported, no one had to investigate birth records. European meant untraceable. European meant clean. Adoption agencies in the North preferred it. Foreign families paid extra for it. These babies were described as rescued from unknown tragedy, as survivors of distant chaos. But the truth was much closer. It lived in locked church rooms, in sealed baptism books, in sermons about purity, bloodlines, and salvation. And beneath all of it was one unspoken rule. Some children were never meant to belong to the place that created them. By 1920, the pattern was impossible to ignore. By 1935, the record stopped entirely. And by 1950, anyone who remembered the babies learned to stop talking. Because the children were gone, and the places that made them were still standing. Every town had at least one church that never locked its doors. Even at night. Even in storms. Even when no one was supposed to be inside. They called it faith. But locals noticed something else. Lights would glow after midnight. Carriages arrived without sound. Women entered through side doors, faces hidden beneath shawls. No hymns were sung. No bells rang. And by morning, everything looked normal again. These churches owned adjoining buildings, former seminaries, and used rectories, abandoned classrooms. Officially, they were storage spaces. Unofficially, they were places where sins were handled quietly. The women arrived from neighboring counties. Some were teenagers. Some were married. Some already had children. They were never local. That mattered. Local girls had families who asked questions. Outsiders did not. The women were told they were being protected, hidden from scandal, saved from disgrace. They were housed in church rooms with covered windows. They were prayed over daily. And they were warned. You will leave whole, but you will not leave with the child. The language was gentle, almost kind, but it was final. No hospitals were involved. Doctors were not called. Only midwives connected to the church. Women who knew how to deliver babies without paperwork. Births happened on narrow beds, on floors covered in clean sheets, under crosses mounted too high to touch. The babies were taken immediately. Some mothers never held them. Some were told the child had died. Others were told something worse, that the child must be given up for its own safety. What safety meant was never explained. Not every baby was kept. This is where the horror sharpens. Infants were examined closely. Skin tone, hair texture, eye color. Only certain children were taken into the system. The rest were handled locally. Church records describe this as placement variants. But no placement records exist. Only gaps. Only silence. Only a repeating note written in the margins of ledgers. Suitable. Or not suitable. No one explained suitable for what. South Carolina lived under obsession. Blood mattered. History mattered. Whiteness was guarded like scripture. These churches preached purity while hiding evidence of its collapse. Some fathers were powerful men. Preachers, judges, landowners. Men whose names could never appear next to scandal. The solution was simple. Erase the child. Rename it. Send it away. And tell everyone it came from Europe. In 1912, a young clerk noticed something strange. An orphanage shipment listed 5 infants. But only 4 arrived. No explanation. No correction. The 5th child simply vanished from the record. When the clerk asked, he was told, that one was reclaimed. By whom? No answer. The clerk quit the following month. He never worked in record-keeping again. And the shipments continued. Most of the files were destroyed. Fires. Floods. Renovations. That was the official story. But some papers survived by accident, misfiled, forgotten, or taken home by people who felt something was wrong but didn't know why. Loose baptism cards. Adoption receipts without names. Letters that were never mailed. They all shared one detail. Every child was renamed twice. Once at birth. Once before disappearance. It made tracing them nearly impossible. Unless the child remembered. In 1938, a woman in Ohio wrote to a South Carolina church. She was adopted. She was pregnant. And something felt wrong. Her letter said, I don't know where I'm from, but my blood feels like it's circling back on itself. She had been told she was European, but no country matched her paperwork. The church never replied. 6 months later, she sent another letter, this time asking if the church had ever hosted unmarried women during the year she was born. That letter was marked received. No response followed. The woman stopped writing after that. Years later, similar stories appeared. Adopted children. Nightmares. They dreamed of narrow rooms. Bare bulbs. Prayers spoken too quietly. They remembered women crying behind walls. Not faces. Not names. Just the feeling of being given away. Psychologists called it false memory. But the dreams were too similar. The same doors. The same stairs. The same smell of old wood and oil. Children who had never met were remembering the same place. One orphanage matron kept a private journal. She never intended it to be found. In it, she described the special arrivals. She wrote that the babies were calmer than others. Quieter. Too quiet. She believed they sensed something was unfinished. One entry reads, they look at you like they're waiting for something to come back. She also noted that these children were adopted faster than any others. Sometimes within days. Sometimes without meeting the adoptive family. The matron stopped writing abruptly in 1924. The final page contained only one sentence. They told me I had seen enough. Not all children were sent away. A few aged out of the system. They stayed in South Carolina. They blended in. But people noticed something unsettling. They avoided churches. They refused baptism. They reacted badly to hymns. One man reportedly fainted whenever church bells rang. Another became obsessed with genealogy, tracing bloodlines that always ended in blank spaces. When asked where he was born, he would say, somewhere they didn't want me. By the 1940s, a pattern was clear. The children weren't just being hidden. They were being separated from something. From whom? Or from what? Some historians believe the system was about race. Others believe it was about power. But there is a third theory, one that appears only in private letters and whispered accounts. That the children were evidence. Living proof that respected institutions had crossed a line they could never admit. And once created, that proof had to be erased. No one ever asked what happened to the mothers. They disappeared too. Records show women entering counties and never leaving. No graves. No death certificates. Just names crossed out. It is possible the children were not the only ones removed. It is possible the system required silence from both sides. And silence is easier to maintain when no one remains to speak. The children carried something invisible, a sense of being misplaced, of belonging nowhere, not because they were adopted, but because their existence itself was denied. They were born into secrecy, raised on lies, and taught, from the beginning, that asking questions was dangerous. Some never did. Others asked anyway. And those are the ones whose letters survive. In 1947, a county registrar named Thomas Hale did something no one else had done. He compared books, birth records, church baptism logs, orphanage intake forms. They did not match. Entire years were missing. Names appeared once and never again. Children existed on paper without ever being born. Hale was not a crusader. He was not brave. He was just tired of lies that didn't line up. He wrote one letter to the state. Just one. It asked a simple question. Why are there more children than births? The response came quickly, not in writing. Men visited Hale's office. They praised his diligence. They thanked him for his service. They suggested retirement. No threats were made. None were needed. His access was quietly reduced. Files were moved. Keys stopped working. Within weeks, Hale was reassigned to a different county. The investigation ended without ever officially beginning. Before he left, Hale noticed one room that had never been cataloged. A storage space beneath a church annex. It required 3 keys. He had 2. The third was kept by a priest who had died years earlier. The door was never opened. But Hale noticed something strange. The floor beneath it was newer than the rest of the building, as if something had been removed or sealed. 2 months after Hale's transfer, the church burned. Electrical fire. Total loss. That was the report. No injuries. No investigation. The annex collapsed inward. The locked room was gone. So were decades of records. The town held a prayer service, and then moved on. People talked quietly after that. About crying heard during the fire. About shapes moving where no one stood. Old women crossed themselves when passing the ruins. Someone said bones had been found in the foundation. Someone else said they were animal remains. No one checked. Years later, Hale's widow found something in a trunk. A ledger he had copied by hand. Not complete. Just fragments. Names. Dates. Notes. And one phrase repeated again and again besides certain entries. Do not integrate. Not relocate. Not adopt. Integrate. As if the children were being removed to prevent something from mixing or surfacing. By mid-century, the process slowed. Not because it was exposed, but because it no longer needed to exist. The children were gone. The mothers were gone. The proof was gone. The lie had worked. The system dissolved quietly, and history sealed over it like dirt. What remained were people, adults who never knew where they came from, families with unexplained gaps, churches with sealed basements, an estate that never asked itself why. One of Hale's notes ended with a sentence he never shared publicly. This wasn't about saving children. It was about controlling what the future could remember. Systems don't vanish. They fade. The churches involved still stand. Their walls repainted. Their basements locked. New congregations pray inside them now, unaware of what their buildings once hid. But the silence remains. Not because no one remembers, but because remembering changes things. By the 1970s, some of the European children were grandparents. They had families of their own, but something felt unfinished. They searched records. They submitted DNA. They found nothing. Because records don't just hide truth. They shape it. Without a past, you begin to doubt your right to exist. Therapists notice patterns. Adopted individuals from the Southeast reporting. Chronic detachment. Fear of institutions. Anxiety around authority. Dreams of being watched. Not trauma from adoption. Trauma from erasure. When a system denies your origin, it denies your place in the world. No church ever apologized. No inquiry was opened. When asked decades later, officials said, "We have no knowledge of such practices," which may have been true. Institutions forget by design. They rotate leadership. They bury archives. They let time do the work. Because the mechanism still exists. Rebranding. Relabeling. Removing inconvenient people from history. What happened in South Carolina wasn't an accident. It was a test. And it worked. Some believe the children were hidden because of race. Others believe it was about power. But the darkest theory is this. The system was protecting the image of moral authority. Not God. Not faith. But control. History records wars. Laws. Presidents. It rarely records quiet systems. The ones that operate without names. The ones that don't need violence. Only silence. One final record exists. A baby deemed unsuitable. No adoption. No relocation. Just a note. Retained. No further entries. No explanation. Some secrets don't disappear. They wait. The horror is not that this happened. The horror is that it could happen quietly. That it could happen in churches, in ledgers, in ink, without anyone screaming. If you are searching for where you came from, and the records end suddenly, it doesn't mean you came from nowhere. It means someone worked very hard to make sure you wouldn't be found. This was not a story about the past. It was about how easily truth can be managed, and how long lies can live when no one forces them into the light.